Executive Officer, JC2 Ventures, John Chambers, and award-winning writer, author, and consultant, Diane Brady.
Hello. Good evening. Hey, Diane.
Kyla Guru. I'm not even going to tell you what I was doing at 16. Would you hire her?
Yes, the fun thing is, if you really watch for successful companies and successful startups as well, it's about vision and strategy, but it's all about talent. So one of the fun things I was watching her as she presented, I was trying to decide after she graduated from college, and I met her and her parents backstage, would I think she'd make a better CEO, a head of marketing, a head of sales or engineering? So how many in this room think she'd make a better CEO? A head of marketing?
Do we see them?
An engineering lead? A head of sales? See, I love the way she could sell. But today it's fun to be back at RSA, and Diane, I want to thank you for being my business partner and writing the book together. We'll have fun.
It'll be fun, and it is my first time. It is not your first time at RSA at all. So give me some sense even of the evolution of this conference.
Well, it's been amazing. We used to talk about the internet era and how it was 3 times faster than what had occurred in the traditional business over time. With this digital world we're facing, it again is going up a factor, in my opinion, 3 to 5 times faster, and RSA has changed. When I look back 8 years ago, and when I was CEO of Cisco at that time, I made security our #1 focus point. It is for a very simple reason. If you believe that every company in the world will become a technology company, a digital company, regardless if you're in manufacturing, insurance, healthcare, or government, and you begin to think about connections which would go from 1,000 connections that ended up when Cisco was formed, let's say 15 billion today to 500 billion in 10 years, that Internet of Things and digitization, getting the right information at the right time, the right person, will change every aspect of our lives. But also security, and cybersecurity must be the fabric that architecturally goes across the whole thing. So I think much like the internet was, and when I joined Cisco in 91, it was for the people that really were passionate about the internet and loved the technology, and yet it evolved into our everyday lives. And I think you're seeing RSA make that same transition to where it was really about the security geeks and people that loved it, such as myself, and understood the impact potentially of it in the future. But today it's mainline. I don't care if you're in the boardroom, the CEO, a government leader, one of the best hackers in the world. Security now is a fabric as we make these transitions to a digital world that must be embedded in everything we do from the cyber perspective.
Well, it's interesting because at Cisco you were an early investor in cybersecurity. JC2, a lot of the portfolio is also around cybersecurity. I think this is the first time you've come back, I believe, as head of JC2 Ventures.
That's right.
So talk a little bit about JC2 and even just the companies in the portfolio, because it's a really fascinating mix.
Well, it's fun. You know, I always believe, for those of you who know me very well, I never make my first move on any strategy until I've played the game out to the end. Basically, it's like a chess game. I understand what my outcome I would like to occur, what are my challenges, etc., and play out the various scenarios backwards and forwards. When I knew that I wanted to move on to the next chapter of my life and make a very smooth transition of Cisco, which I think we did, in most people's opinions, I wanted to think what I was going to do next, and I decided that I'm going to try to change the world in my small way one more time. The internet did change the way we work, live, learn, and play, and when we said that in the early 90s, people said, you're a router company, and yet I think we had a huge impact. When I think about the next challenges we're going to face as society, and if you look what is happening because of the technology that many people in this room helped to empower, we're probably going to destroy about 30 to 40% of the jobs in terms of what people are doing today with digitization, AI, etc. At the same time, as we completely transform businesses, and you see the models of what Amazon challenged the physical retail type environment, you're going to see that in every industry vertical. And so you're probably going to see about 40% of the large companies as we know them today not exist in 10 years. People used to say, John, that's too aggressive a number. Now they're saying perhaps it's going to be accurate. So we can all do the math very quickly, and let's just use the US as an example. If you want to add 25 to 30 million jobs over this next decade, and you're going to decrease the headcount in the large companies, and productivity is going to drive that down even further, plus consolidation, then your whole engine for future GDP growth and job creation will be the startups. I also believe that as people today, my generation, when we got out of school, we wanted to go to the big Fortune 100 companies, a Goldman Sachs, if you will, or a JP Morgan Chase, or Ford, or GM. Today, when young people graduate, they don't want to go to the large companies or the large government agencies anymore. And this has largely been in the last 5 years a tremendous change. But you see the best and brightest, whether it's MIT or Stanford or across the rest of the U.S., want to go to startups. So our key is, can we get the startup engine growing dramatically faster again? How many of you think the U.S. is leading in startups in the world?
I doubt we're going to get
How many of you think we're not?
a lot of
I
hands
agree
just
with
went
you
up.
completely. If you watch, we used to be number 1 and number 2 in innovation. Bloomberg's index said we're now number 11. And so we've got to get the startup engine not just going dramatically stronger. And during the mid-90s, we averaged almost 500 to 700 companies going public per year on the IPOs. Today, we're getting excited about 225. And during that 90s, we generated almost 30 million jobs in a decade, with a large part of it being off the back of the startups and the internet revolution. So your key is, look to the startups for the future. They will be our job creation engine. They'll drive GDP. They also will be the primary element of innovation, in my opinion, because they're going to be getting the best and brightest out of schools going to them. And you'll see large companies work with startups, especially in security, but in AI and other elements in a way they haven't done before. So to play a role in that, that's what I got excited about. And
So
I
you
want
want
to
to create the next Cisco, or are you trying to create companies that can really scale and just hire tons of people? Do they have to be huge? How do you pick the winners that go in the portfolio?
Well, probably 3 different questions you just asked me, Diane. The first is you want to create companies that can be role models for others.
Right.
I wanted to also do that on an inclusive basis. If the startups are just in the West Coast and the Northeast, we're going to leave behind the central part of the nation, the Southeast, and that's where I've lived in 8 of those states. So I'm trying to do it geographically diverse across the U.S. and make it inclusive by geography and by gender. Secondly, when I look to the startups, what I look for, I look very simply at where will be the vision and strategy to catch a technology transition occurring at the same time a business model transition occurs. And we've all seen them. We talked about Amazon versus a Walmart, a Tesla versus GM, a Uber versus a prior way of sharing assets. And then I look at the CEO. I really want a CEO who wants to be coached, who has the potential to do great things, but knows what she or he knows and knows what they don't, and truly wants a mentor that has seen every movie, and I have seen every movie. I've done some things right, and I've done a lot of things wrong. But once you've seen every movie, you can almost help that CEO not only scale and grow the organization, but handle the inevitable stress that comes at them. The third thing I look for is, do they have a chance to dominate? And with startups, I use the word dominate, their segment of the industry, be number 1 and number 2. How close are they to an inflection point within the category? And so when I thought about this, and it goes a little bit back to what Kyla was talking about, if I were a young person today and advising your children what should they learn in high school and college, I'd say number 1, learn about entrepreneurship. Number 2, learn about artificial intelligence. Number 3, learn about cybersecurity. You do those 3, you can write your market from there on out. So those are the categories that I'm looking at from a company perspective being involved with.
Well, and I can say that having seen you in action, you really do coach the CEOs, which I think is different than a lot of people who invest money. They invest in the technology. You really are investing in the people as much as anything.
I'm investing entirely in people and the dreams. And many people often criticize me at Cisco, and part of it is fair, about dreaming too big and taking on too much. And the more I thought about that, and I discussed it with somebody that we lost a little bit over a year ago, Shimon Perez, he said, no, John, I would challenge you to dream dreamer and dream bigger and to take more risks. And that's what I'm attempting to do. Part of what I've done over the last 2.5, 3 years is to partner with France about France becoming the startup nation of Europe. How many people thought France could be the startup nation of Europe and the innovation engine for Europe? 5 years ago, I would not have put resources into France. It was a great place to visit, wonderful people, but it was the last place you go for entrepreneurship, even though they invented the word. And yet they changed themselves in a period of only 4 years. They moved from 140 startups per year, venture back, to 750. You saw Prime Minister Modi do the same thing in India. If you want to bet in one country in the world outside the U.S., bet on India. They will grow their economy between 7 and 11% for the next decade, doubling their per capita income every 6 to 10 years in terms of the implementation. But what it requires is the ability to say, how do you get startups to be an integral part of the 1.2 million jobs that need to be created per month in India? Or how do you get startups to be an integral part of a digital France? And it's interesting enough to watch how France has become the startup engine for Europe.
So you actually have Indian companies in your portfolio, and I want to get back to that because a remarkable number of the companies you've invested in are in the security space. So
Yes.
do you want to talk a little bit about that? I mean, I'm just going down the list, I look at them, it seems like, was it Lucidius, Unifor, Pindrop, Balbix? I mean, why security? And tell me a little bit about how you view it differently now in this role even than when you did at Cisco. The world's changed and your role's changed.
Well, I'm more now a provider of security architectures and platforms, some of which we bought by other companies if we do our job right. Some will hopefully be the next Cisco or the best Palo Alto Networks or the best Symantec, etc. And so they are involved in 6 of them at the present time. When I formed JC2, I was as much interested in how you get innovation going, job creation, geographic and gender inclusion, as well as driving GDP growth. And so if I look at security, it will be one of the 3 hottest areas. The other 2 are AI, if you will, and the Internet of Things. And using this example, the only secure phone that I'm aware of in the world is this phone. It basically is a product of Pavoro. Mike Fong did an amazing job of taking first an Apple, then he'll move to Android phone, put it in a secure case. It isn't just a case, it's a platform. And the toughest government and the best hackers in the world have not been able to break this. So if you watch what happens to Pavoro this next year, I think it will be the #1 mobile cybersecurity ramp up of the year. Another concept of de-drone, and basically we saw what happened at the airports, you read about what's happened in prisons. De-drone makes the capability to determine where a drone's coming from, who's flying it, is it authorized or not, what's its serial number, etc. And then you can combine it with the capability to do electronic pulsing and actually with a laser type of gun, bring down the drone and make it for a soft landing. What your Landcrest has done there, they're growing at way over 300% per year, year over year. There's a company out of Atlanta called Pindrop, and it did fraud identification, especially in call centers, because that's where 60% of the security violations occur, and then spread into the rest of the company. And now they're going to do voice authentication. And it's very probable that voice authentication will be not just the primary interface that we do to the machines, the robots of the world, but it will be the primary security vector. It appears to be the hardest one to spoof in terms of capability. Then you have companies like Spark Cognition with their deep armor capability to prevent 99.6, according to their data, day zero type of attacks at the edge of the network. Balbix, which is just an amazing company in terms of anticipating where your vulnerabilities are and how do you strengthen that. Again, led by a very young, very, very effective CEO in Gaba Banga. And then the last one, and this is a leap of faith, and this goes back to talent, a 28-year-old CEO out of India, Saket Modi, who is looking at how do you give a score to your cybersecurity defenses and capabilities based on your key applications, your geographies, your mainframe activity to the edge, and then how can you get cybersecurity off of it? Because today, when you talk to a board of directors or to the CEO and you say, how is your security? And you can see them get a little bit uncomfortable because they know they're mainly basing their comfort level on their chief security officer saying that it's reasonably good, and yet they've watched so many of their peers get into trouble on it. And they don't know if you put money into certain cybersecurity type of products, how are they going to get the payback or know if they really got the benefit on it? So what this young man has done is said, here's the score, a 0 to 5, very simple to understand. He has dominated the Indian market. He does the Bombay Stock Exchange. He's done the top manufacturing company, the top government agencies, etc. And he's bringing it to the U.S. And so what you see is 6 commonalities of security companies who actually may work loosely together over time. The average growth this last year of 5 of the 6 this last year grew over 200%. More importantly, they grew their headcount between 50 to 100% in terms of year-over-year growth, job creation, if you will. And suddenly you're seeing large companies partner with startups in a way I've not seen before in my business career.
Well, it's interesting, and I want to get, of course, to the book, very important, but I want to distill some of the lessons from the book, because I think about the people in the audience, and let's, give advice. Let's say, for example, you're working in the security space.
Yes.
You've been a CEO, you've been on boards. What advice do you have to people working in that in terms of how to either bring more attention or more intelligence to the debate within companies around security? Let's just start with that.
Well, I don't think there's an issue today that the boards and CEOs, regardless of company, understand how important security is. Their real issue is, how do I know if I do something that I'm going to dramatically improve the quality of my security? And they all understand the financial downside to brand and even liability if they do it wrong. But the transition, I would argue, this audience has to go through was exactly what the internet went through in the early 90s. We were largely a techie group, and proud of it, that connected a lot of research people, and our products were almost designed to be hard because we only wanted smart people using them. And we transitioned ourselves from building routing and switching and wireless capability to building products and platforms that produced outcomes. And so I think the quicker that we can move cybersecurity to the outcome we can do and identify, if you spend money in an area, here's the benefit you're going to get with a business model that executives can make decisions off of regardless of their regardless of the size of their company, then I think that's the goal we have. So what I try to coach, and I'm coaching 18 startups that I've invested in, and another probably 40 that I'm loosely tied to. I focus on taking your technology concepts and bringing it over to a business outcome and talking about how that can change in a positive way for the effect of the customers.
Which gets to the business case for diversity, because that has been one of the challenges, especially in this part of the industry. I love even some of the stories of how you've managed to sort of convince people to take on roles that they might not naturally take. Give me some sense of how you view diversity and what advice you have, because we constantly talk about it. It's been very hard to achieve.
Well, my mother was a doctor at a time that female doctors were kind of rare. She was an athlete, which was also rarer, ballroom dancer, and valedictorian of all 3 of her classes from high school on. She taught me very early on, men and women are of course equal, although she would probably say women are smart. If you look at it purely from an economic point of view, 54% of our graduates in the U.S. from college are female. So if you don't have that same makeup in your company, whether you're a government or a big company or smaller company, you're not playing up to its future potential. I think you need to also address that, and Kyla said it very well. You've got to get young people, especially our female population, excited about what technology can do for them, not in terms of geeky terms, but in terms of outcomes. So make entrepreneurship something that they want to do and they see their future in terms of direction. So I'm a believer that my generation failed in getting proper diversity, both geographic diversity and gender diversity into our companies and into the job growth. And while I'm very proud of what we did at Cisco, we had over 30% of our board female before anybody even started talking about how important it was to have female representation. And we were fortunate enough to have a huge representation of my senior team and the team that's there today being females as well. but our average mix in the company was only 25%. We took it from a low number to 25, but it kind of stalled out there. So I'm thinking about how do we make this different, everything from mentoring to the one thing that I think will change for the startups is we found that in the startups, now of course always when I try something controversial, I try it overseas in a small area where people won't see if I fail. And if I fail, then nobody hears about it. But when it works, you can then learn from that model and then say, how do you replicate it? And so with the startups, we piloted in India, which is a challenging place for diversity. We piloted about, for every open rec you have, you must interview one female. No requirements on numbers or hires or anything else. And literally in 14 months, this organization, Unifor, took their mix of male versus female from female being at 22% to 34%.
Just
I'm now
bringing
encouraging
them to the table.
Well, what you do is just give them a chance.
Right.
And you don't know what you don't know. We tend to hire people that look like us, that think like us, and we tend to recruit that way. And it should be the reverse. If you get people in front of you and you give people a fair shot, you can make the difference. The other thing that I think we have to do with startups, and I'm doing it with mine, is you've got to include geographic capabilities in that. All 50 states have to become startups in the U.S. And yet we know that 90% of our venture capital goes into 6 major cities. We had the same issue in India. The average state of the 29 states has a population of 50 to 60 million, and yet 92% of their venture capital goes into 6 cities. And so what Modi is doing, and I'm honored to be one of his key advisors and confidants. Yeah, I'm going there tomorrow, getting an award that most Americans may not be familiar with, the Padma Bhushan Award, but it's kind of like the top award that governments give to citizens and the people of the world, and I was the only foreigner to get that award.
Congratulations. I actually just heard this for the first time. Congratulations.
But
On stage.
So what it shows is countries that are thinking about their startup engine being their future and taking risk. I mean, Modi is a risk taker, and he's a dreamer. And he does his vision and strategy himself, and he inspires hope, and then he gets people to believe it's possible, then probable, and executes. Macron's done the same thing in France. The U.S., we are no longer a startup nation like we were a decade or two ago. We've got to get that engine going again, and we've got to think about how we not create 25 million jobs, probably twice that for the jobs we also destroy with the technology changes.
Well, it's interesting. So it does bring me to the book, because I think about, first of all, let's just start with, why did you want to write a book? Because it's a bit of a, Faustian pact. Not everybody retires and wants to write about their story, and interestingly, you didn't just want to write about your story, you really wanted to write a business book. So just tell people a little bit about that.
Well, being completely candid, I felt a book was something somebody could write about you after you're dead, and I had no interest.
Yeah.
And several friends said, John, what you do when you go out and talk to these startups, it doesn't matter if you're in Dubai or London or Berlin or Paris or Delhi or Beijing, the questions were the same. And what I felt that we did very well at Cisco, and people often ask what did we do that was different than others, broke into several categories. We focused always about getting market transitions right, and we'd only move when there was a transition, both business and technology-wise. And we focused on being one or two or not competing in a category. But what we did was develop a replicatable playbook for how do you implement these processes with tremendous speed. And I used to think of process as bureaucracy and a dirty word. That slows you down, and boy was I wrong. Once you implement a process that can be replicated with speed, that innovation process allows you to do something no one else can do. We acquired 180 companies when I was at Cisco. We had the highest hit rate in the industry, probably by a factor of 4 or 5-fold in terms of the number of companies that really worked and made a huge difference and brought us to the leadership role versus our peers. And what we did was develop the innovation playbook on how do we select those companies, how do we decide which ones to hire, which one to acquire, what were the importance of cultural alignment, etc. And then we could run this playbook so fast you could get a call on a Thursday night about a hot startup in security or in collaboration from the NASDAQ, the people that I trusted there, and said, John, you're an idiot, which they didn't tell me periodically. At times they were right. You are about to have a company bought that belongs in your portfolio, and your competitors have been in there for 6 to 12 months. Are you asleep? And I was embarrassed because I didn't even know the company's name. We went over to meet with them the next day. My business development lead went first. He called me after there and said, John, you got to get here. By lunch that day, we had a handshake for a $3.2 billion acquisition. We had it through both boards of directors and announced Monday morning before our competitors even knew we were in the account. The point I'm making is innovation, to be effective, has to be run in a process-oriented way. And it has to be replicatable. And this is why so many companies in high tech end up being one-product companies. They don't think about what is it that allowed them to get their leadership in this characteristic and our ability to move into adjacencies. And the same thing is true in terms of how we digitize countries.
Yeah.
We had basically our 10 major steps where we thought the interest would be, the alignment with government leaders who really got it. And it did surprise me, because if I were that early, I would have thought it would be Germany or UK that would lead Europe. But you saw France changing at a tremendous speed. And so that ability then to run that playbook very, very rapidly. I have the same playbook for startups.
I think that's probably what I took away from the book is the power of the playbook and the power of leadership and making big bets. And one of the things that does, I think, get to the heart of I've seen a lot of people talking about this conference,
yes,
is the background. You brought a very different background to a Silicon Valley CEO than a lot of people might expect. Number one, you're from West Virginia. Number two, you don't consider yourself really a tech guy. You're somebody who comes out of sales.
yes.
I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about just your own background sort of coming into this space. And we start the book in West Virginia, which I think is very telling, because you're back in West Virginia again doing some work.
Well, Diane was a great partner for me on this. She's the artist, and I'm the business person, the bullet person. And she taught me that the way I always communicate is through stories. Because you'll remember stories, you won't remember the points. You know, if I say here, disrupt or be disrupted, you've got to tell the story behind it. You have to understand the implications of doing the right thing too long is what gets you into trouble with the story behind it. So coming out of West Virginia, we were the chemical center of the world. FMC, DuPont, Carbide, etc. 6,000 of the most brilliant people in the world from Charleston, West Virginia. And we were the coal industry center of the world, 125,000 coal miners employed. And we had more millionaires in West Virginia than the entire United Kingdom had. And yet, because we kept doing the right thing too long, and we didn't realize the changes that were coming in the chemical industry or the coal industry, and now we are one of the most challenged states in the nation. So I watched that occur, and my dad taught me why it was going to occur and showed me how it was going to occur, and it did occur as he told me. I then went up to Boston, Route 128 out of school after a tenure at IBM, and I watched 128, which was the Silicon Valley of the world 25 years ago. And Digital Equipment and Wang and Data General, 1,000 other high-tech companies were in that area. And because we did not reinvent ourselves, because we didn't move on to the next generation of software and PCs and the internet, those jobs are all gone. 32,000 at Wang, 106,000 at Digital Equipment, a million jobs just lost. So I've seen what happens when you become too complacent, not just in the old world areas of retail or manufacturing, but in high tech itself. And there is no entitlement as you go forward. You either disrupt or you're going to get disrupted. So watching that disruption occur in West Virginia, watching it occur in Boston 128, and while I was pretty good at technology and a couple of years of electrical engineering at Duke, I really loved business. And so I didn't think I would go into technology. And a friend called me up and said, come and interview at IBM. And I said, Steve, I didn't go to college for 9.5 years and 3 degrees to go be a salesperson. He said, I got 2 tickets to the ballgame. I said, I'll be there. And that's important in life. And Kyle alluded to it earlier. You want to have an education that allows you to move into different areas. And you want to always operate outside your comfort zone. Have the courage to constantly try to reinvent yourself and do not keep doing the right thing too long. I went up there and the IBM branch manager did a very good job of closing me. He said, John, you aren't going to join us. I said, well, sir, you are amazing, but no, I really don't like technology. Yeah. And he said, let me show you what technology can do to transform business. And he could tell I really got infatuated by that. And then he said, what's your best offer? And he said, I'll guarantee you twice that next year. And I ended up in the field out of luck, but it goes back to the importance of education and the ability to learn is your key elements. And then they taught me how you take technology to solve business problems or society problems. So once you've seen that movie so many times, you can often predict the outcome as you go forward. You can sit with a young CEO and help him or her scale their company. You can deal with them when they make their inevitable mistakes in crisis management that often crashes the companies. You give them the mentorship and the guidance, and you teach them to know what they know and know what they don't. Because almost without exception, the great young CEOs, they know what they know, but they think it applies to other areas they may not be as good at.
Yeah.
A great engineer who thinks they can pick out a great sales lead almost never happens. And then you have to explain to them why they're going to pay the sales lead more than they make themselves.
You spend a lot of time helping people get their teams together. So the title, Connecting the Dots, I think is very much everybody in this room, if you work in anything to do with cyber risk, cyber security, it is about connecting the dots. And tell us a little bit about how you see the landscape right now, and even you talk about your dyslexic brain helps, but what are some of the ways in which people can sort of develop more of that pattern thinking, because we don't know where the next risk is going to come from?
Well, I think it goes back to designing architectures, not products, and then how do you make these architectures play together. The great news is for all of you in cybersecurity, you've got job security going forward as long as you continue to reinvent yourself. And it's going to be combined with AI, with the Internet of Things and 500 billion devices. So the attacks planes are going to actually grow dramatically. However, I think if you begin to think about it more from an architectural perspective and think about how you tie these together, we will make most of the things pretty